It's my pleasure to be here to talk about energy storage, which is really the Swiss Army knife of the modern electricity grid. My name is Jim Lazar. I'm here at the invitation of the Institute for Energy Studies at Western Washington University. And in a sense, I might be one of the first graduates to have concentrated in this field. I graduated from Western in 1974 with concentration in environmental economics, and a lot of my work uh, had to do with electricity economics. And I'm just delighted that there's now a whole program here that works on energy issues. Our electric grid is changing, and it's changing quite a lot. The graph on the left shows the hourly electricity usage in Texas. Uh, Low overnight, high in the middle of the day, and dropping down again in the evening. And we used to meet this load by building power plants that were adequate to meet our peak demand and running more fuel into them during the peak hours to produce more power and turning them down when power loads were low. That's the old way. Now we do things very differently. We generate a lot of our electricity with wind and solar that produces power on its own schedule. We forecast how much generation will be available at each hour. And then sometimes we actually schedule our load. On the left here, a time of use rate with highest rates during the periods of the day when the system is under stress, and lower rates at other hours, encouraging people to use power in the off-peak periods. On the right, a smart thermostat that might actually adjust our thermostat during the high-cost parts of the day to be not quite as comfortable as during the low-cost times of the day. Now, temporal imbalance is common in all sorts of markets. In fact, virtually every market where production and consumption don't match at any particular moment in time. How do they deal with that in the hardware industry, in the gasoline industry, in the grocery industry, or the clothing industry? Well, it's very simple. They have inventory, they have warehouses, they have storage of what they sell. Until recently, this wasn't very possible in many electric systems, except those with big hydro dams to store electricity. But that's changing. Now, we harvest all the corn in the fall, but somehow we manage to eat cornflakes all year long and concentrated during a very short part of the day, usually in the morning. How is that possible? And the answer is storage. Storage in silos in the Midwest, storage at the factory where the cornflakes are made, regional warehouses that have storage scattered around the country with truckloads and truckloads of cornflakes waiting for us to go to Costco or the supermarket to buy them, more storage at Costco by the pallet or the supermarket by the case, and finally a little bit of storage at home where I have 4 or 5 boxes of cereal waiting for me to be ready for breakfast. We're going to see the electricity system become more like the cornflake breakfast cereal industry. Power systems face a lot of challenges. Sometimes there's not enough generating capacity to meet peak demand at the hottest or coldest hours of the day in the year. There's not enough transmission capacity at those peak times. There's not enough distribution capacity to get the power to each customer at peak times. Other kinds of problems. A nuclear plant trips offline unexpectedly, taking 1,000 megawatts of generation off the grid suddenly, or a transmission line relays off unexpectedly. This isn't common, but it's taken entire cities' power down for a day or two at a time. A tree falls on a distribution line in your neighborhood, disrupting service to your home. Or there's too much solar and too much wind all at one time. Storage can help with all of these problems. And my talk today is really focusing on some of the different types of storage and how that can help with making our power system more economical, more reliable, and more sustainable. Inflexible generating resources need storage. Load varies through the day. If our generating resources can't be flexible, they're not going to keep the lights on. Solar alone won't do it. The blue line here is solar production peaking in the middle of the day compared with that daily load line, and the lights won't stay on. A nuclear plant also won't work. It needs storage. Nuclear plant, the blue line here, continuous output at every hour, can't be varied by more than 1% or so per hour. Can't really follow load. Nuclear plant would produce too much power overnight, not enough power during the day, and would need storage to store power overnight and make it available during the day. To get your power from a single wind area, it's not going to work. Here, the gray line is power from West Texas wind farms, high overnight, low in the middle of the day. That's not kind of just the opposite of the shape of the customer load. You can get a different wind area. This is South Texas wind, kind of low overnight and during the day, and peaks in the evening. Well, that's a different shape, but it still doesn't follow that red line of when we need power. Now, if you put a portfolio of resources together here, I've got 1/3 solar in pink, 1/3 West Texas wind in gray, 1/3 South Texas wind in yellow. You put them together, and we're getting close. That is, a portfolio can actually come quite close to meeting our load, but it's not going to be perfect. And even with this portfolio, we're going to have excess generation overnight, not enough generation in the middle of the day, not enough generation in the evening. We're going to need storage in order to keep the lights on. Energy storage takes a lot of forms. If there's one thing you take away from this talk, storage is not just batteries. The upper left, hydroelectric dams provide storage. They refill once a year in the spring. We use the power through the rest of the year. Grand Coulee Dam is a good example. Electric cars have battery storage in them. We can charge them when the power is cheap, when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. We can drive our cars when we want to. Upper right, a major solar farm with a big battery storage facility located at it. Can take power when the sun is shining, put some of it on the transmission line as it's shining, hold more of it for the evening, and ship the rest of it out after the sun has gone down and the transmission line has capacity available. In the bottom right, a typical home battery, in this case, a Tesla Powerwall, and one that I think is very important that nearly all of us have at home is a water heater. Water heater, in this case, a heat pump water heater, has a heating element that needs to run between 1 and 3 hours a day to give us a day's worth of hot water, and a tank that can hold a day's worth of hot water. We can heat that water whenever the power is cheap, when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, and hold that hot water in form of stored thermal energy, and then take a hot shower, do the dishes, do laundry, whenever we want to. So I'll start with hydroelectric storage. It's seasonal. Grand Coulee Dam is the example. It fills every spring. It's depleted as the winter goes by. It holds billions and billions of kilowatt hours of storage, but you can only fill up once a year. The Northwest relies on hydro and a whole network of dams with storage in many of them to catch the spring runoff when the snow melts in the spring and hold it for us to use through the summer, the fall, and into the winter. There's also multi-year storage. This example is WAC Bennett Dam up in northern British Columbia, the largest hydro reservoir in the Northwest. Holds about 60 million acre feet, about 5 times as much water as Grand Coulee Dam. But it took 5 years to fill. It holds far more than 1 year's flow of the Pace River. It holds more like 20 billion kilowatt hours. It gives BC Hydro tremendous flexibility. When the rest of the region is experiencing a drought, BC can draw down its savings account at Bennett Dam and sell into the market when prices are high. But it's a long way away. It requires a very long and expensive transmission connection, and you can only fill it over a multi-year period. Now, there's also daily hydroelectric storage, what we call pumped storage. And here I'll use the example of the Helms pumped storage plant down in California. It was built in conjunction with the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant to shape the output of Diablo Canyon. There's an upper reservoir and a lower reservoir. The upper reservoir gets filled every night by water pumped up from the lower reservoir. And that power is then let back down to generate at peak hours in the early part of the day before the sun comes up, and then in the early evening and into the evening after the sun has gone down. Works in conjunction with the nuclear and solar facilities in California. It holds about 13 million kilowatt hours, but it can be refilled day after day after day after day. So many, many times a year. Then there's battery storage. There's lots of kinds of battery storage and new technologies being proven up every year. The most common are lithium ion batteries. In the past, nickel, magnesium, cobalt, or NMC batteries were the most efficient and had the best power to weight ratio. These were used in our cell phones and our laptop computers, but were also used in a lot of electric cars. More common now are lithium iron phosphate batteries made with much more common and lower cost materials. They don't hold as much power per pound, but they hold a lot more power per dollar. For stationary installations like this one at a solar farm, lithium iron phosphate is a better choice. But there are also flow batteries or chemical batteries, sodium sulfur batteries, solid state batteries, and a host more emerging technologies coming into the market. And I'm not going to predict what the successful technologies 10 years from now are. The evolution of this technology is moving too fast to predict that far out. Thermal storage is also very important. Storing energy in the form it will be used. Hot includes a number of different things. It can be thermal bricks, it can be hot water, it can be molten salt. Cold thermal storage can be ice, it can be chilled water. On the far right here are two chilled water tanks at a Google data center in the Dalles, Oregon, that I came across while bicycling on the riverfront bicycle path there. They're able to make their chilled water, make it cold whenever the power is cheap. It is in the data center, about half the power consumption is for the computers, and about half of the consumption is for the cooling systems to keep the computers cool so they perform well. In this case, Google can meet half of its demand with power available at any time of the day or night from wind or solar. And they only need a constant supply of electricity for the computer part of the load. Huge financial savings for them and huge environmental benefits for all of us. There's also gravity storage. I don't know if it's going to be very feasible. There's a couple of projects under construction in China right now, literally stacking up heavy weights. They use these cranes and pulleys to lift the weights when the wind is blowing or the sun is shining and the electricity is cheap. And that consumes electricity to raise the blocks up, and then let them back down again when power is more valuable, and those motors turn into generators and make electricity as the weights come back down again. The main thing is that electricity storage is now cheap. This is a graph from Bloomberg of lithium ion battery packs over the last 15 years. From $1,500 a kilowatt hour to now below $100 a kilowatt hour. This is really dramatic. At $100 a kilowatt hour, it basically means for battery, you can charge and discharge maybe 300 times a year, sometimes more. That the cost of turning electricity whenever you have it into electricity whenever you want it is on the order of 5 cents a kilowatt hour. If wind and solar can produce power at 2, 3, 4 cents a kilowatt hour, we can use it directly when we want to use power when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. If we need to save it for later, it's still going to cost us less than a dime a kilowatt hour, well below today's typical retail rates. The declining cost of storage is changing the industry dramatically. You compare capital costs to meet peak. If you want to build generation and transmission and distribution the old-fashioned way to make electricity as people are demanding it and deliver it to them in real time, you're looking at capital costs of $1,000 a kilowatt and up for generation, $1,000 a kilowatt and up for new transmission, $1,000 a kilowatt and up for new distribution substations and bigger conductors and bigger transformers. Or if we only need that capacity for 4 hours a day, spending $100 a kilowatt hour for 4 hours of battery storage, locating that storage near the load so we don't need transmission and distribution investments to meet peak, is 1/5 to 1/10 the cost of doing it the old-fashioned way by building expensive new capacity. So let's talk about some real problems that the system has faced and how they've been handled. Transmission capacity was under stress in Bellevue, Washington. A lot of residential growth, a lot of business growth. Puget Sound Energy identified a capacity shortfall for about 200 hours per year in Bellevue, typically early morning in the winter, late afternoon in the summer. The selected solution that Puget came up with was to build a new transmission line, the Energized East Side project. Cost of that was about $550 million. In my opinion, this could have been addressed much more economically with controls on water heaters, controls on electric vehicle chargers, and some installation of distributed battery storage along the route of the proposed transmission line. Bring power into the neighborhood overnight when the wind is blowing and power is cheap and transmission system was not stressed, hold it and deliver it to customers during the peak hours, avoiding the need to upgrade a transmission line. I think a real opportunity was missed in Bellevue. Clouds come and go at a solar farm. Another problem, happens all the time. This is an example from Kauai. On the upper part of this graph is the output of a solar farm in Kauai. As clouds come and go, it oscillates up and down very sharply. But a local battery bank at this solar farm gets dispatched, the red part of this graph at the bottom, to fill in the gaps so that the utility receives a very nice smooth output from the solar farm. It's very easy to manage the system and schedule other resources to meet customer needs. One good use of a battery. Same exact battery bank can also provide a backup when a power plant trips offline. Same battery bank in Kauai. The upper part of this graph, a oil-fired power plant tripped offline and the frequency dropped on the Hawaii power system. The battery bank immediately started pumping power into the line and responded in milliseconds. Uh, and within a couple of seconds, the power was back up to the proper frequency. The battery bank was able to pick up the load. No power plant can respond as fast as a battery bank in a situation like this. Another problem of too much wind or solar. This is California power system at the top of this in a recent day. That big blob of yellow in the middle is solar power coming into the system. The other colors are natural gas, biomass, hydro, and wind and nuclear and other resources. Well, all that solar in the middle of the day creates a glut of power. No problem. At the bottom of the graph, you can see that power is being put into storage. This blue line at the bottom is the use of storage, delivering power into the system in the morning and the evening, but taking power from the system in the middle of the day. The batteries back soak up that excess solar in the middle of the day. Now, when the sun goes down, the same exact graph, that power gets pumped right back out into the system after the sun goes down to support power consumption that would be more expensive to meet by running conventional power plants. Tremendous flexibility being brought day after day after day after day in California. Another problem, transmission lines are full at peak hours. At a solar farm like this, you can hold back power for a few hours. Typically now, wind and solar farms are being built with about 4 hours of storage. That allows them to hold the power that's being produced from being released into the grid until there's more capacity. This may enable higher loading of transmission lines. It may improve the reliability of transmission. And it's a tremendous improvement that we're seeing now at wind and solar farms around the US and throughout the world. Now, if a transmission line trips offline, it would take a very, very large storage facility to back up a transmission line trip. A high voltage transmission line carry 1,000, 2,000, even 3,000 megawatts of power. It would be a very large battery bank indeed, but it's not technically difficult. And in fact, in Australia, several very large battery banks have been built for specifically that purpose, to make sure that the transmission line reliability is backed up. The other recent problem in Spain, what they called power oscillations that they were not able to adapt to, and eventually the power went down in Spain for about 12 hours across the whole country, gradually coming back on over that 12-hour period. Now, the consumption in Spain is about the same as the power consumption in Texas or the power consumption in California, similar size systems. But Spain has only 1% of the battery storage of Texas or California. It was estimated in one report that I read that if Spain had had another 400 megawatts of battery storage, just literally a small percentage of what Texas and California have, it would have been able to make it through the oscillations, bring the system back under control, and maintain reliable power. Battery banks are going to be a very important part of system reliability in the future. Another problem, you have a local distribution constraint. Everybody wants to cook dinner at the same time. Everybody wants to turn on their air conditioner on a hot afternoon. Everybody needs their heat to come on in the morning when it's time to get up and go to work. Well, local energy storage can help with this. In this case, Green Mountain Power, a utility in Vermont, has partnered with its customers to install batteries in people's homes on most days when the system is operating normally. The utility dispatches these batteries to minimize the utility's costs and keep everybody's uh, lights on at reasonable cost. But whenever there's an outage, if the tree falls on distribution line, the capacity of those batteries is available to the people in the homes where they're located to provide a reliability backup, using the same batteries for more than one purpose, to provide system peaking reserves, to provide daily uh, energy arbitrage, and then also to provide a reliability reserve for the customers where they're located. It's not all batteries. I've said this a couple of times. I'll keep saying it. Thermal storage is a tremendous resource. This is an example of a ice storage air conditioning system in a large commercial building. The graph on the left shows the loads of a typical commercial buildings with, base load for all the security systems, lighting during the day, the fans for the cooling system running mostly when people are in the building. And then on a hot day, the cooling load piles on top of that. On the right, they show what happens if you have an ice bank. You have stored cooling. You can use power very consistently across the day, buy power overnight when it's cheaper or in a solar-based system in the middle of the day when it's cheaper, to make your chilled water or ice when the power is cheap, and then use it when the air is hot. There's a new thermal storage facility in Texas that uses off-grid solar, very large solar field, to charge a thermal battery with electric heat and bricks in order to make steam to inject into oil wells to force more oil out. A solar powered oil production field. Pretty interesting. But I want to spend just a couple of minutes of your time talking about water heaters, so what we call the hidden battery. We've all got one. Almost all of us have water heaters with a storage tank. Those storage tanks can be incredibly valuable. Water heaters run pretty sporadically, 1, 2, maybe 3 hours a day. This graphic here is a friend of mine, Kevin's house in Seattle, on a January day. The green is the output of his solar system, not very much, in Seattle in January. The red is the electricity consumption, and the 4 big spikes, 3 of them for about 15 minutes and 1 for about an hour, 6 p.m., are the water heater coming on. 4.4 kW, the largest load in his home. We can spot those. We can move them around. The water heater doesn't have to run in those hours. There's enough storage in the tank to pretty much last the day. We could heat that water anytime that the power was cheap and use the hot water whenever we want to. In most parts of the country, hot water use peaks in the morning and has another peak in the evening when we get home, but it's pretty low overnight and it's relatively low in the middle of the day. This graphs 12 different months of water usage in the northern tier states, Minnesota area. I did some work in Hawaii on using water heaters for energy storage. In the apartments in Maui, 13,000 condominiums, low-rise condominiums with individual water heaters. Daily water usage in these homes is about 5 kilowatt hours a day. 52-gallon water tank can hold about 8 kilowatt hours, so more than a day's supply. In theory, you could heat the water once a day whenever the power was cheap, in the middle of the day when the sun is shining, or the middle of the night when the wind is blowing, and coast through the whole rest of the day. About a third of the capacity of the tank is unused storage. Left to run on their own, Hawaii happens to have an evening peaking hot water use. People tend to shower when they get home from work. Told it's a residual behavior from the plantation era when people were working hard at work. Very little use in the overnight hours, fair amount in the morning, low at midday, and then highest in the evening. But remember, that tank holds a whole day's supply. We could reduce the charging from 6 to 10 in the morning, shown as the negative here, increase the charging at other hours overnight and in the middle of the day when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, and then turn that water heater off and coast through using the storage in the tank in the evening after the sun goes down until the load drops and the wind picks up. If we made those shifts, the charging would look like this: a whole bunch of charging overnight in hours, from midnight to 6 in the morning. Then the heating elements would shut off, let people coast through the morning. That's a very difficult time for the utility, a lot of electricity consumption, and the solar facilities aren't producing. Then once you get to 11 o'clock in the morning and the solar system's producing a lot of power, charge the water heater back up again. You do this every day. Charge it twice a day, discharge it twice a day. And what happens? The state of charge in that water heater never drops below half. That is, the consumer would never notice that their water heater is being managed to synchronize with wind power overnight and solar power in the middle of the day. They would never run out of hot water. And indeed, in tests that have been done, where people are given an override button, that override button only gets pushed like 1% of the hours. 99% of the time, people never even notice that their water heater is being managed to save them money and to reduce the environmental impact of hot water production. Now, we can also use electric vehicles as grid batteries. There's the simple stuff, dumb charging, where you come home and you plug in, and you get home at 5:30 and you plug in, and you're charging during the peak hours of the day when the system is under stress. Sun is going down, solar production isn't very high, the wind may not be blowing, and it's quite expensive. Next is smart charging, where you come home and plug in and your car is smart enough to wait until the power is cheaper, and it'll charge overnight, and by the time you leave in the morning, it's fully charged. But there's also vehicle to load, using the vehicle to directly power loads. In this case, a Ford F-150 Lightning truck being used as the power source for a construction site. No need to spend thousands of dollars to have the electric utility bring in a temporary service drop during the construction period. The truck can bring workers to work in the morning and also bring enough electricity to get them through the day. When it goes home in the evening, it'll plug into the grid. Typically, the wind is blowing overnight. It can recharge on low-cost clean electricity. But the next step is what we call vehicle to grid, where the electric vehicle connects to a charger that is bidirectional, this V2G unit on the far right. Sometimes the car is charging from the solar panels on the roof of the house through the V2G unit. Sometimes the car is charging from the electric grid coming through the house to the charger. Sometimes the electric vehicle may be backfeeding to the vehicle to grid unit to support the grid during the highest cost hours of the evening, or providing a backup in case of a distribution system outage. This is becoming a common feature of new electric vehicles. It will become more common, and if I come back here in 10 years, we will find that it's happening all over the world. I'm very optimistic about the electric vehicles becoming an important part of our battery backup system for a pretty simple reason I'll get to in just a moment. The Pacific Northwest grid has about 5 million water heaters. If these were all used uh, to store power when it's available cheaply and then to let us use the hot water whenever we want to, it would give us about 7 billion kilowatt hours of electricity storage a year. Add to that 3 million electric vehicles. We don't have 3 million electric vehicles yet, but 10 years from now, we will have. If 1/2 to 1/3 of the battery capacity of those cars is made available to the grid, since I most days we only drive a small fraction of the range of an electric vehicle. A new electric vehicle has maybe 300 miles of range, and a typical person drives about 30 miles a day. But once in a while, we need all of it, and we can use all of it. Well, if we use just a third of that battery capacity to support the grid, that would give us 75 million kilowatt hours of storage. It was available 300 days a year. That would be 20 billion kilowatt hours of storage per year. Just the water heaters and the EVs are like 4 times as big as Grand Coulee Dam. This is an opportunity that is huge. It is going to be available, it's going to be economical, and we really need to have the systems in place, the technical systems and the pricing systems to make it used and useful for supporting our power grid. Now, a Swiss Army knife is a great tool, and you can do a lot with it, but this little saw is not up to the task of this fallen tree. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that maybe the Swiss Army knife can't do by itself, or that it will take time for us to adapt to. The first challenge is what we call the Dunkelflaute, the German word for dark doldrums, a multi-day period when it's cloudy and still. Both wind production and solar production are suppressed. Hydro storage dams are a great resource, and some of our hydro capacity should be saved for these situations. We're fortunate in the Northwest that we have a lot of hydro capacity, and putting some of it aside to meet these occasional few times a year, we have a multi-day period when it's both cloudy and still. It's going to be important for us. Another is what you do with a dry year in a hydro-rich system. This graph is the precipitation, which ultimately translates into the amount of hydropower available for the last 100 years in the Pacific Northwest. There are some years, like 1977, a record low year, we had a real shortage of electricity from our hydro system. And then some other years when we've had much above average precipitation. Snowpack can be 50% above or below average in a year. Big storage dams like Bennett Dam that I talked about earlier can help a lot. Dams that take multiple years to fill. But if you only need them in the dry years, they can help a lot. Interregional transmission connections can be important. When the Northwest is experiencing a drought, it's likely that other parts of the country are having very different weather conditions, and that we could import power from them, and in the wet years, we can export power to them. We do quite a bit of that with California now, but a national grid with DC transmission connections would give us even more flexibility. And finally, something's being looked at in Hawaii and planned for is to use biodiesel in conventional power plants. Biodiesel is relatively expensive, but not frightfully expensive. It's extremely easy to store, and we certainly know how to use it in conventional power plants. That's a real opportunity. Another challenge, what we call like-kind defects. France is dependent on just, really one basic nuclear design. In a couple of years, 1988 and 2022, they had common failures that created dangers. They needed to shut down a lot of the plants all at the same time. We had the same problem in the United States after the 3 Mile Island accident, 1979. Japan had a similar problem after the Fukushima accident. The solutions to this are not storage, but diversity of supply. Do not have too much of your power coming from any resource that is subject to the risk of like-kind defects, and also interregional connections. France was fortunate to be connected to Germany, to Spain, to have wind and solar and other resources available to them when their nuclear plants were unable to run as much as usual. Winter in northern latitudes is a big challenge for the power system. The most important thing is energy efficiency. And these are very well insulated buildings with high performance glazing, and the grid is underground and reinforced, then we're not as at risk to extreme weather conditions. A diverse power supply with multiple sources, wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, and other sources helps a lot. Interregional connections between northern latitudes uh, and southern latitudes. The transmission system that connects Bennett Dam in the far north of British Columbia to us continues on to Southern California and into Mexico. Those interregional connections can be extremely valuable to deal with winter in the northern latitudes and summer in places that have extreme heat. There are some climate challenges that grid electricity is not going to solve, and I'm not going to go into these, but I think they're worth mentioning. Air transport is going to be a big challenge. There are some short range, electric aircraft being developed, but they're not going to be able to carry enough battery storage for long distance flight. Marine transport or container ships and oil tankers and log ships and other marine vessels are not going to be solved with grid electricity. Remote work sites have always been off grid, typically with diesel. More and more of them are now solar and battery. That's not a grid electricity solution, but it's an electricity solution. Fertilizer uses a whole lot of natural gas. We're not going to solve that problem with grid electricity. There, hydrogen, ammonia are going to be relevant for some of these, but grid electricity is not going to solve all of our energy challenges. The power system of the future is going to be different than the power system of the past that I opened with, this big 4 smokestacks. We'll have wind farms with storage at the wind farms, solar farms with storage at the solar farms. We'll have pumped hydro storage connected to our transmission system. We'll have battery storage along the transmission system and at transmission interchange nodes. And then we'll get to our homes. And we'll have storage in our homes, perhaps in the form of storage batteries, backups in our refrigerators, the electric batteries in our cars, our water heaters, and perhaps other appliances. That's going to be our power system of the future, just like the cornflake world. Storage at the production, transmission, and distribution levels will allow our electric power system to become more like our breakfast cereal system. Economical, reliable, available when we want it. I'm going to finish by taking you for a tour through your home of the future. I think you're going to like it. This home is going to be built to a very efficient building code with heavy insulation, very efficient windows. It will have high efficiency heat pumps with air exchangers in each of the major rooms so we can keep each part of the house at the temperature we want. When it's running, that'll draw a lot of power. We may have an ice storage system to carry our air conditioning peak load, so we don't need to be running our heat pumps when the electricity, to make the cold when the electricity is expensive. When that ice storage is running, it's going to draw a lot of power. We'll have smart thermostats that allow us to adjust the comfort zone for each part of the house based on the price of electricity. When it's expensive, we might put up with it being a little warmer or cooler to save money. We'll have smart charging electric vehicles that will be bi-directional, able to provide power to the house, charge from the solar system on the roof of the house, charge from the grid, and perhaps even backfeed to the grid at times. When they're charging, they'll be drawing a lot of power. We'll have a grid integrated heat pump water heater that will sense when the grid has cheap power and fill up our tank with hot water when the power is cheap. When it's running, it will draw quite a bit of power. We'll have smart appliances, refrigerators, dishwashers, clothes washers that will respond to the needs of the power system, the level of storage we have in our houses, prices of power, and help us maintain the comfort we want at the lowest possible price. When those appliances are running, they'll be consuming a lot of power. If all of these appliances were running at the same time, it could add up to a lot. In this case, 22 kW, or about 20 times the average use of an energy efficient home across the year. But because of the smart systems that I've talked about, when the system is under stress, we can get that down to about 1/8 of that level of consumption. And even that can be covered by our home battery or the batteries in our electric vehicles and carry us through a period when the grid isn't able to deliver to us at all. I think you're going to like that new home. It's going to be comfortable. It's going to be economical. It's going to be good for the planet. Thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to questions. I hope I've given you a few things to think about.